A boy vanished in 1981. 22 years later, his jacket was found in a sealed locker at his old school. In 1981, a 14-year-old boy left the arcade and never made it home. The police had their theory. The school had no answers. But his mother never stopped searching. For 22 years, the truth was buried, until someone opened a door that was never meant to be unlocked. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It means everything to know we're telling these stories together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The air was thick with the usual summer dust that stuck to your skin after school, the kind of dryness only kids and cracked sidewalks understood. It was a Friday in early June, 1981. Jalen Moore, 14 years old, wore his signature red windbreaker zipped up to the neck, even though it was too hot for it. His mother, Carol, had told him 100 times not to wear it in the heat, but Jalen never listened. It wasn't just a jacket, it was part of his identity. She had bought it for him after he won a middle school science award. He had been so proud of that moment, and somehow the jacket held the memory in its seams. That afternoon, Jalen left school as usual, his books tucked under one arm and a folded flyer for Galaxy Spot, his favorite arcade, poking out from his back pocket. The Galaxy was his haven, a place where quarters turned into spaceship battles and the loud buzz of pixelated enemies drowned out everything else. He had made a plan to stop by for just 30 minutes before walking home, just like he'd done so many times before. But that day, Jalen never made it back. When 6 p.m. came and went without him walking through the front door, Carol began to worry. Jalen was never late, not even once. She looked out the window every few minutes, expecting to see his skinny frame walking up their street with that red flash of windbreaker bouncing in rhythm with his steps. By 7 o'clock, she was calling neighbors. By 8 o'clock, she was on the phone with the police. "I need to report my son missing," she told the operator, trying to keep her voice calm. "Jalen Moore. He's 14. He didn't come home from school." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, at that age, it's not unusual for boys to wander off. Maybe he's at a friend's house." "He's not," Carol said quickly. "He doesn't do that. He's never late. He doesn't just wander." An officer finally arrived around 10:15 that night. He was young, white, and looked more annoyed than concerned. He took down Jalen's description: red jacket, khaki pants, sneakers with a blue stripe. He asked the usual questions, but didn't seem to be writing much down. "Sometimes kids just need a break, you know," he offered. "He'll probably come back in the morning." Carol's lips tightened. "He's not a runaway. He was supposed to help me make dinner tonight. He never misses dinner." The officer nodded, but didn't argue. He promised to file a report, then left with a casual, "Let us know if he turns up." That night, Carol didn't sleep. She sat in the kitchen, the porch light left on, Jalen's empty dinner plate still on the counter. She kept hearing sounds outside, neighborhood dogs, the wind pushing trash along the curb. And every time, she'd rush to the window. But it was never him. By morning, she had called the school. The secretary sounded half asleep. "Jalen Moore? I think he was marked present yesterday. Did you try calling his friends?" "I'm not asking for guesses," Carol snapped. "I'm asking if anyone saw him leave." There was a pause. "Well, actually, I think someone mentioned he was called to the office during last period. But that'd be in the logbook. I want that logbook checked. You'll have to talk to Principal Dorsey about that. He doesn't come in on Saturdays." Carol hung up and drove straight to the school. She banged on the office door until a janitor opened it. "Principal's not here, ma'am," he told her. "Come back Monday." She paced the sidewalk for hours, watching the school building like it might spill out her son if she stared long enough. She asked passing students if they'd seen Jalen. Some said no. One girl mentioned seeing him near the principal's office. Another said she saw him walking alone by the south wing, heading toward the back staircase. That didn't make sense. Jalen always exited through the front. On Monday, Carol returned to the school. She demanded to see Principal Dorsey. He met her in the hallway with a tight smile and folded arms. "I'm sorry for your concern, Ms. Moore, but we've had no incident reported. And to be clear, your son left campus without informing staff. We don't keep track of students once they're off property." "I was told he was called to your office," she said. "I have no record of that," Dorsey replied, eyes flat. "I want to see the logbook." That's not public information. Carol's hands trembled, but she didn't back down. Then call the police, because if he was called here and never came home, you're the last adult who saw him. Dorsey's expression hardened. I suggest you leave the premises. When she didn't move, security was called. They told her she was being disruptive. She left, humiliated but burning with rage. That week, Carol went door to door handing out flyers. She posted them at the arcade, at every bus stop in town, on church bulletin boards. The local news station said they'd look into it, but no one ever came to interview her. She asked about getting his face on the evening broadcast and was told they reserved that for confirmed abductions. The police refused to issue an alert. You need proof of foul play, the officer told her. My son is proof, she said through tears. The days blurred. Weeks passed. Jalen's red jacket never turned up. His bank account remained untouched. No one had seen or heard from him. Still, the authorities listed him as possibly a runaway. Carol kept his room the same. His science fair ribbon still hung by the window. The last comic book he read lay folded open on the bed. She refused to call it grief. Not yet, because in her heart, she believed something happened inside that school, and someone knew exactly what. The days after Jalen's disappearance were not filled with search parties or press conferences. There were no helicopters circling above the city, no candlelight vigils or front-page headlines. There was only Carol, exhausted, determined, and surrounded by silence. Every morning, she woke up early and walked the same streets her son once did. She asked shopkeepers, bus drivers, sanitation workers, anyone who might have seen a boy in a red windbreaker. Most shook their heads. A few gave her pitying looks. One man asked if she was sure he hadn't just run off with a girl. He's 14, Carol snapped. He was supposed to come home for dinner. She stopped going to work. The school cafeteria could run without her, but her son's case couldn't. Carol called every police officer whose number she could find, and when they stopped answering, she showed up at the precinct with a notepad full of names, dates, and locations. She brought in one of Jalen's shirts for scent dogs. They told her they had no dogs available. She offered to pay. They said no. It was in that same week she first met Officer Marcus Hill, the fresh-faced rookie assigned to follow up on her case. He looked barely older than Jalen, and he held his notepad like it might catch fire in his hands. Did you interview the principal? She asked him. He was called to the office before he disappeared. I haven't spoken to him yet, Marcus replied, but I'll be meeting with him soon. Then why are you here? He might be the last person to see my boy alive. He didn't have an answer. Carol offered him everything. Jalen's dental records, a list of close friends, even the name of a student who claimed to see him heading toward the back wing. Officer Hill said he'd file it all, that someone would be in touch. No one ever was. Instead, a week later, a supervisor at the precinct told her there's no indication of crime. The kid might have just taken off. You said yourself he likes science fiction and games. Maybe he wanted adventure. Carol stared at him in disbelief. He doesn't even ride the bus alone without telling me. He's a good kid. Quiet. Smart. You think he just vanished because he wanted adventure? The officer leaned back in his chair and shrugged. You'd be surprised what teenagers do. By now, the flyers had faded under the sun. Carol replaced them weekly, carrying a staple gun and a plastic bag of reprints wherever she went. She tried the newspaper again, bringing a photo and a handwritten statement. The editor barely looked up. We don't usually run missing stories unless there's confirmed foul play, he said. Carol leaned across the desk. So my son doesn't matter unless someone finds him dead? The man blinked. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. The interview never ran. At church, the pastor asked the congregation to keep Jalen in their prayers. A few friends from the neighborhood offered to help with flyers or food, but slowly they stopped showing up. Even the other parents at school kept their distance. Some looked at Carol like she was cursed. Others just didn't want to get involved. People were afraid to believe that a child could disappear and no one would do a damn thing. 2 weeks in, Carol marched back to the school. She waited outside the main office until she saw Principal Frank Dorsey arriving. He wore his usual pressed slacks and stiff tie, his keys swinging from a belt loop. I need 5 minutes, she said, stepping in front of him. He sighed. Ms. Moore, I've already told you. You haven't told me anything, she snapped. Jalen was called to your office the day he disappeared. That's not a coincidence. Dorsey looked around the hallway, then spoke low. There's no record of him being called down that day. Then show me, Carol challenged. Show me the record book. That's school property. I can't just hand it over. I'm not asking you to hand it over. I'm asking you to look me in the eye and tell me he wasn't here. Dorsey's eyes flickered. We've had a lot of students in and out. I can't remember everyone. Jalen wasn't every student, she said. He's my child. Dorsey didn't answer. Instead, he stepped around her, brushing past with a clipped, if there's anything to share, the authorities will follow up. That night, Carol stood in Jalen's room and stared at his desk. His notebooks were still stacked neatly, homework unfinished. A comic book lay open to a page where a hero stood alone on an alien world, trying to find his way back home. She thought of Jalen sitting at the arcade, his smile as he dropped quarters into the machine, his hunched shoulders when he concentrated. He was just a boy, not a runaway, not a ghost. He was someone the system didn't want to bother saving. 6 months passed. Jalen's case was marked inactive. Carol was told she could file for a death certificate if she wanted closure. She refused. There was no funeral, no headstone, just an empty seat at the dinner table and a red windbreaker that never came home, and a mother no one would listen to. The old school building had been silent for years. In the spring of 2003, McKinley Middle School, boarded up, graffitied, and half collapsed in places, was scheduled for demolition. The city had approved a plan to build low-income housing on the land. Crews arrived to strip the building, gut the insides, and remove anything of value. What they didn't expect to find was a memory sealed inside the wall, forgotten by time, but not by the one woman who had waited for decades to be heard. Henry Banks hadn't walked those halls in over 15 years. He was almost 70 now, slower on his feet, but still strong in the arms. When the contractor called and asked if he'd help sort through the basement junk, old desks, file cabinets, broken lockers, he hesitated at first, but something about it pulled at him. Maybe guilt, maybe something deeper. He arrived early, before the noise of machines and jackhammers. The old key still worked. When he stepped inside, the scent of mildew, dust, and long-forgotten floor polish hit him like a wave. He walked past the cafeteria, the library, the trophy case that once held plaques now removed or stolen. And then he took the narrow staircase down to the basement. The part of the school no one ever liked to be in. The air was heavier down there. The fluorescent lights barely worked, flickering like old memories trying to stay alive. Henry had always hated the back locker section. In the early 80s, that entire wing had been sealed off after a supposed mold issue. No one had touched it since. He picked up a crowbar, jammed it into the frame of one rusted locker, and pulled until the metal bent open. Most were empty. A few had dust-covered shoes, old textbooks, even a cheerleading pom-pom hardened by time. And then, in the last row near the bricked-off wall, he found it. A locker with a loose back panel. He tugged at it. The wood behind the steel had rotted, and when it cracked open, something soft tumbled forward. It was a red windbreaker. He froze. The color was faded, the fabric stiff, but still intact. He turned it over. Inside the collar, in fading permanent marker, the name was written in clear block letters. Jalen M. Henry sat on a stool for a long time. That name had lived in whispers for over 2 decades. He remembered the posters, the crying mother, the questions everyone had tried to ignore. When the school sealed off the basement, no one had explained why. Just that it was for health reasons. He stood, jacket in hand, and walked out. That same afternoon, Renee Jackson was reviewing tips in her inbox. A local journalist with a reputation for reopening cold cases, she had grown up just 5 blocks from McKinley Middle. She'd never forgotten the boy with the big eyes and the red jacket. His face used to be taped to the telephone pole outside her old apartment building. Henry's email was short. No subject line. Just a photo of the jacket and a message. Found this in a sealed locker today. I think it belonged to the boy who went missing. I thought someone should know. Renee dropped everything. She called him immediately. Within an hour, she was on her way to his house, recorder in one pocket, camera in the other. Henry told her everything. how he was the janitor during Jalen's last year, how he remembered whispers about something happening in the basement, how Principal Dorsey had ordered that wing shut down just months after the boy vanished. No explanation. No inspection. They never asked questions, Henry said. Not the school board. Not the police. Not the press. Everybody wanted to move on. Renee took detailed photos of the jacket, the name, the locker, and the surrounding wall. When she asked if anyone else had access to the basement back then, Henry hesitated. Only a few of us. But the one with keys to everything was Dorsey. That night, Renee published the first draft of her article. Jacket found in demolished school may belong to teen missing since 1981. She included Jalen's photo, the close-up of the name tag, and an interview clip of Carol Moore from a decades-old local broadcast, begging for someone to believe her. The internet did what the city hadn't. Within 24 hours, the article had gone viral. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments. Calls flooded the local police department. Carol Moore's name was trending. Detective Marcus Hill, now a senior officer nearing retirement, was called in to consult. When he saw the photo of the jacket, his stomach dropped. He had filed that original report. He had told that woman, twice, that her son had probably run away. He hadn't known it would haunt him like this. He hadn't expected to see her face again. But now, 2 decades too late, the city was finally listening. Carol got the call from Renee herself. At first, she didn't say anything. She just held the phone in her hand, her breath caught in her throat. When Renee told her they'd found the jacket, his jacket, Carol pressed the receiver to her chest and wept. Not because it meant he was alive, not because it gave her closure, but because someone had finally found something that proved he was real. He was never a runaway. He was a child, and someone had sealed a part of him inside a wall and walked away. Detective Marcus Hill hadn't set foot in the McKinley precinct basement in years. The old files from the early 80s had been boxed, water damaged, and pushed into forgotten corners. But after Renee Jackson's story exploded across every local channel and news site, he was instructed, formally, this time, to reopen the Moore case. He didn't argue. He remembered Carol Moore, remembered her voice, her trembling hands clutching a photograph of her son, remembered thinking she was just another mother too emotional to accept the truth that her son had run away. That's what they all believed back then. Or rather, that's what they told themselves. It was easier than asking harder questions. Now, 22 years later, those questions were clawing their way back. Carol met him in the station's small interview room, same as before. She looked different, of course. Her hair was grayer, her shoulders thinner, her face marked by decades of unspoken grief. But her eyes? Her eyes were exactly the same. Sharp, tired, watchful. "I never forgot your face," she said quietly, not unkindly. "But I hoped I'd never have to see it again." Marcus cleared his throat. "Mrs. Moore, I just want to say, I don't need an apology," she interrupted. "I need you to do your job this time." He nodded. "I intend to." He showed her photos of the jacket. She didn't need them. "That's his," she said without hesitation. "I stitched the inside collar myself. He used to lose his jackets, so I marked all of them with his name." "We're running DNA swabs," Marcus said. "From the collar, the inside lining. We're hoping to find something." Carol's mouth tightened. "You don't have to find something. You already did." Renee Jackson, meanwhile, wasn't slowing down. She spent her nights buried in microfilm at the local library and her days interviewing anyone who had attended McKinley between 1979 and 1983. Most of the students had forgotten everything, classes, teachers, homework, but a few remembered rumors. Stories about the reflection room. It had been mentioned in whispers. A space in the basement where bad kids were taken. Sometimes just for detention. Sometimes for longer. No windows. No clocks. A few students claimed to have been there, but said it was too dark to remember clearly. Others didn't want to talk at all. Renee dug deeper. She found archived school board minutes from 1982, referencing a temporary closure of the basement wing due to environmental concerns. No follow-up. No report. Just silence. Then she found something stranger. A list of disciplinary actions from 1981, partially redacted. Several students were listed for unauthorized absence from class on the same week Jalen disappeared. But next to Jalen's name was a note in different handwriting. Sent to office. Escorted by staff. No mention of which staff member. No confirmation he returned to class. Just that one line. Renee brought it to Marcus, who immediately requested old security access logs, if any still existed. What he found was limited but telling. Only 3 staff members had master keys to the entire school. The janitor, the vice principal, and Principal Frank Dorsey. Henry Banks had already spoken to the press. The vice principal had passed away in the late 90s. That left Dorsey, and Dorsey too was dead, but the files he left behind weren't. Marcus requested access to the sealed records stored in the district's central archive. It took over a week to get approval. When he finally opened the faded manila folders, he found something that made his hands go cold. Several complaints, filed anonymously by staff, all alleging inappropriate behavior, verbal intimidation, and unsupervised discipline sessions with male students. None of the complaints had been escalated. All were marked reviewed with a red stamp. No signatures, no responses, just buried. Marcus called Renee. "We found sealed complaints against Dorsey," he told her. "He was never investigated, never even questioned." Renee didn't sound surprised. He had too much power. Everyone was afraid of him. Carol listened quietly when Marcus relayed the findings. She didn't react, just nodded, then asked a single question. "Is the room still there?" They didn't know. The area had been sealed behind drywall and lockers. But if the jacket was there, maybe more was. The next day, with a full city permit and a forensic team on site, Marcus and a small crew returned to McKinley Middle. The demolition was temporarily halted. Dust filled the air. A single hallway light flickered overhead. Marcus stood in the back locker row, the same place Henry Banks had described. He gave the signal. Workers began peeling back the rotted locker doors, revealing a concrete wall patched hastily with uneven bricks. The construction supervisor turned. "You sure about this?" "Open it," Marcus said. It took 20 minutes to get through, and when the last layer crumbled, they saw it. A door. Steel. Rusted. Unmarked. It groaned as it opened. The air inside was heavy, still and sickening. A single chair stood in the middle of the room. Its legs were bolted to the floor. Torn cloth straps lay on the seat. Pencil markings covered one wall, scribbles, tallies, circles. A few pages from a school workbook lay damp and moldy in the corner. The forensics team stepped in, snapping photos, taking swabs, logging every inch. No blood, no body, but something happened there. Marcus didn't say anything. He couldn't, because what he was looking at wasn't a basement. It was a cage. A cold, silent room where a child had been taken. A room built by a school, locked by a man, and forgotten by everyone, except the mother who never stopped knocking. The photographs from the hidden room spread fast. Renee Jackson's next article hit harder than the last. Titled, "The Boy in the Basement, the School Buried Twice." It showed grainy images of the rusted chair, the scribbled wall, and a narrow, suffocating space where a child had clearly been held. Readers were horrified. Comment sections filled with rage. People who had once dismissed Jalen Moore's disappearance as just a runaway case were now confronting the truth, that a 14-year-old boy had likely been imprisoned beneath a public school while everyone looked the other way. Carol Moore refused to look at the photos. She didn't need to. She had imagined worse in her mind for 22 years. The silence, the uncertainty, the slow erasure of her son's name from every system that was supposed to protect him. That had been its own kind of torture. Now, she finally had confirmation that he hadn't left her. He hadn't run away. He had been taken, trapped, forgotten. What hurt most was that he had been so close. Just blocks from home, inches behind a wall, and no one listened when she begged them to search. The forensic team moved carefully. DNA swabs were taken from the seat, the straps, and the pencil scribbles on the wall. It would take time for results, but the preliminary findings were clear. The fingerprints matched Jalen's from a school health form. Even after 2 decades, the dust had preserved traces of him. One officer stood staring at the wall for a long time, his eyes fixed on the dozens of pencil marks. They looked like tallies, a count of days, or maybe hours. Some of the circles were drawn over and over, layered so deeply into the brick they left grooves. There were also letters, faint and slanted. J. M. repeated in different corners. And in the bottom right wall, nearly hidden behind grime, a final message. Mom will find me. Detective Marcus Hill stood there with his jaw clenched. He didn't cry, but something inside him cracked. 22 years ago, he had let Carol Moore walk out of that precinct with nothing but a pamphlet and a warning not to cause too much noise. And now the noise was everywhere. He called her personally that night. She answered on the first ring. "We found writing on the wall," he said. She didn't speak at first. "He wrote your initials," Marcus added. "And something else." "What?" He wrote, "Mom will find me." The line broke Carol. She dropped the phone and let the sound of her own sobbing fill the kitchen. For all those years, she was told to let it go, to move on. But he had believed in her. Even when he was locked in the dark, with no voice and no light, he still believed she would come. And she had. Just too late. Word of the discovery spread to local officials, and soon state investigators were involved. The school district issued a public statement expressing shock and sadness over the disturbing findings, but Carol wasn't interested in statements. She wanted names. She wanted responsibility. Renee delivered. She obtained sealed complaints from the early 1980s through a whistleblower in the district. They confirmed what she already suspected. Multiple allegations have been filed against Principal Frank Dorsey. Allegations that he had taken boys into his office alone for behavioral corrections, that students had returned shaken or silent, and that one child had gone home with bruises and never returned to school. The reports have been quietly investigated and dismissed. Dorsey retired with honors in 1993 and died 6 years later. There would be no trial, no confession, but the story didn't end there. Former students began stepping forward. A man named Curtis Bell, now in his 40s, told Renee that he remembered being taken to the cold room in 7th grade. He'd been caught skipping class. Dorsey had led him down to the basement, said he needed to think about his decisions. Curtis said he was left in the room for hours. When he cried, no one came. When he screamed, it echoed off the walls. "I only went once," he said, "but I never forgot that feeling." Others came forward too, quietly, anonymously. They didn't all remember Jalen, but they remember that room. Carol received a letter in the mail a week later. No return address. Inside was a folded page from a comic book, one Jalen had been reading the week he vanished. It was the same series, same issue. Taped to the page was a note. He didn't deserve that. None of us did. "I'm sorry." She held it like it was his heartbeat. The city council held a meeting. People packed into the chambers. Renee read parts of her article aloud. Carol stood and said only one thing. "You were supposed to protect him." And then she sat down. No one argued. The school board voted to install a permanent memorial where the building once stood. A community garden would be built in Jalen's name. A bench engraved with the words he wrote on the wall. "Mom will find me." But for Carol, no tribute, no plaque, no press release could erase what had been taken. He was still gone, still missing, still hers. They held the vigil on a cool Friday evening in October on the flattened ground where McKinley Middle School had once stood. Nothing remained but dry dirt, some twisted rebar jutting out of the soil, and the faint outline of where the basement once was, the place that had kept Jalen Moore hidden for over 2 decades. A few rows of folding chairs were set up facing a wooden display table, where Jalen's red windbreaker rested inside a glass case. Cleaned and preserved, it still carried the creases of the years it had been balled up behind the wall. The name inside, Jalen, was faint but readable. The zipper was rusted. The left cuff was torn. But Carol had recognized it immediately, without hesitation. She sat in the front row, hands folded neatly in her lap, wearing a simple dark coat and a string of pearls she hadn't taken out of her drawer since her son disappeared. Her hair was tucked into a scarf. Her eyes hadn't left the case since she arrived. Around her, the crowd murmured. Neighbors, old classmates of Jalen, former staff from the school, reporters, pastors, city officials, strangers who had read Renee Jackson's articles and felt compelled to show up. Some carried candles. Some held signs. Some just stood with their hands in their pockets, unable to look Carol in the eye. Detective Marcus Hill stood off to the side, unsure of where he belonged. He wore his best gray suit and a wool coat, collar turned up against the breeze. He watched Carol for a long time before gathering the nerve to approach. "Mrs. Moore," he said gently. She didn't look at him. "I came because I needed to say something." Still, she kept her eyes forward. He cleared his throat. "You were right. About everything. About him not running away. About the school. About that room. You were right, and we all ignored you. I ignored you." Carol blinked slowly. "I was fresh out of the academy. I didn't push back like I should have. I just followed the lead of officers who treated you like noise. I thought I was keeping my job, but I was losing something bigger." Finally, she turned her head and looked at him, not with anger, but with a tired kind of knowing. "You didn't believe me," she said. He shook his head. "No, I didn't." She nodded. "But he did." Marcus blinked. "What?" "My son. He believed I'd find him. Even when they shut that door. Even when they left him in that dark place. He scratched my name into a wall and counted the days, because he believed I wouldn't stop looking." Her voice caught in her throat. "And I didn't." Marcus swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." Carol's voice was barely above a whisper. "So am I." Renee Jackson took the podium next, gripping a note card but not looking at it. Her eyes scanned the crowd as the sunset cast soft gold over the barren school lot. "We are not here to celebrate," she began. "There is no justice in what happened. There is no peace. Only truth, and it took 22 years to dig that truth out from under cement, dust, silence, and shame." She paused. "When I was 10 years old, I walked past Jalen's missing poster every day on my way home from school. I remember the picture. I remember how it curled at the corners in the rain. I remember thinking, even as a kid, how quickly people stopped talking about him. And I remember Carol, standing outside the school with a sign, asking for help while the rest of us moved on." Renee turned to Carol. "You never moved on? And because you didn't, the truth came back." People bowed their heads. Some cried. Others whispered prayers. After the speeches ended, Carol was the first to rise. She walked slowly toward the windbreaker in the glass case. Her heels crunched in the dirt. A hush fell over the crowd. She stood there a moment, studying the jacket, its frayed edges, the places where the threads had pulled free. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the comic page, the one she'd received anonymously, the one that had Jalen's favorite hero flying into the stars, the one that had the note, "He didn't deserve that. None of us did. I'm sorry." Carol unfolded it carefully and placed it beside the jacket, inside the glass, then pressed her hand to the case. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Later that night, the crowd drifted away, and Carol walked home alone. Her neighborhood had changed over the years. New families, newer cars, but the same cracked sidewalks Jalen once skipped across. The porch light on her home still flickered. The screen door creaked the way it always had. Inside, his photo still sat on the mantel, the same one she'd used for the flyers. That awkward school smile, the red jacket zipped to his chin, the big, hopeful eyes that hadn't yet seen how cruel the world could be. She sat in the living room and stared at it, her hands folded again in her lap. Detective Hill had asked her earlier if she felt justice had been served. She hadn't answered. What was justice for a boy locked behind a wall? What was justice for a mother who spent half her life begging to be heard? There were no arrests, no trials. The man most responsible had died with honor and pension. The district had issued an apology. A plaque was being installed at the youth center. A fund was being created in Jalen's name to support cold case investigations. But none of that brought him home. None of it erased the silence. Still, Carol knew something had shifted. People saw him now. They remembered him. And somewhere in that small, rusted room he never should have been in, Jalen had believed she would find him. And she had. Not in time, but in truth. And sometimes, that's the only ending this world is willing to give.